"Mom, it's better if you just wait outside for this part." That was my son, David, my only child. He said it the way you tell a stranger their table isn't ready yet. Polite, a little rushed, already looking past me at someone more important. The photographer only wants immediate family and the Prescotts. You understand? I was standing in the marble entry of the Fairhaven Country Club, holding a small white box in both hands. Inside it was a corsage white garden roses, the same roses I had chosen 3 weeks earlier at the florist. The same roses now standing in tall glass vases on every table in the ballroom behind him. I had paid for those flowers. I had paid for the string quartet warming up in the next room. I had paid the final balance on the 4-tier cake that very morning, in cash, because the baker preferred it. I had paid for the wedding my granddaughter was about to have, and my son was asking me to wait outside. I did not raise my voice. I have never been a woman who raises her voice. I looked down at the corsage box, at my own name written on the sticker in the florist's neat hand, Eleanor. Grandmother of the bride and I felt something in my chest go very still and very clear. "Of course," I said. "I'll be right here." He smiled, relieved, and walked back through the tall doors into the warm gold light of the room I had helped fill. The doors closed, and I stood in the cool marble entry, 71 years old, holding roses I had bought for myself, and I understood that I had just been shown exactly where I ranked. My name is Eleanor. My husband was Walter. We were married 44 years, and he passed 3 years ago in the spring, quietly. In the house we bought in 1974, the house David grew up in. The house I still live in. The house that had lately become the center of every careful conversation my son and his wife tried to have with me. Walter kept the books. That was his work. He was a bookkeeper for a string of family businesses in our county, 40 years of ledgers, and he used to say that a ledger never lies. It only records what people would rather forget. I did not understand, standing in that entry, how much those words were about to matter. I opened the little box. I pinned the corsage to my own coat, by myself, in the reflection of a dark window. And I decided, without heat, without a plan yet, that I was done being invisible. You should understand that this was not the first time. It was only the clearest. For years I had been keeping a ledger of my own, though I never called it that. In my head I kept a running total of what I gave and what came back. And I always came out owing. Somehow it was always me who owed. There were 3 things I had been telling myself were nothing. The first was money. When David and Vanessa bought their house in the good school district, it was my savings that covered the gap they didn't like to mention. When the twins needed braces, when the roof leaked, when Vanessa wanted the kitchen redone before her parents visited a quiet check from me, every time, and never once a card that said thank you. I told myself that was what mothers did. I told myself the giving was the point. The second was the house. My house. For 2 years now, since Walter died, Vanessa had been raising it gently, always wrapped in concern. "We just worry about you rattling around in that big old place. We worry about you falling down those stairs." And David would nod beside her and say nothing, which was its own kind of speaking. The third was David himself. My son had become a man who let his wife do the talking and then agreed with whatever she said and called it keeping the peace. He had a good heart once. I had watched it get quieter and quieter until I wasn't sure it was still in the room. I told myself all of this was nothing. Small things, the ordinary friction of a family. But a woman knows the difference between friction and erosion. Friction you feel. Erosion you only notice when the ground gives way beneath your feet. And I will say this about my son, because it's fair. David never once said the cruel things himself. He didn't have to. He had learned that if he stayed quiet long enough, someone else would say them for him, and his hands would stay clean. Silence, when you owe someone the truth, is not neutral. It is a choice wearing a mild face, and I had let him wear it for 2 years, because he was my boy, and I did not want to see it. Standing in that marble entry, I felt the ground begin to give. I did wait outside, but not the way David meant. After the ceremony, which I watched through a gap in the tall doors, standing at the back like a caterer, the guests moved to the terrace for cocktails, and I slipped down a side hallway to the coat room to gather myself. My knees are not what they were. I needed a minute where no one could see my face. The coat room shared a wall with the little service corridor behind the bar. The wall was thin, and through it, over the clink of glasses and the tuning of the quartet I had paid for, I heard my daughter-in-law's voice, bright and easy, talking to her sister. "No, it's handled. After the honeymoon, we finally get Eleanor settled somewhere with people her own age. David's already spoken to a realtor that lot alone is worth a fortune, tear down or not." A laugh, a glass being set down. Honestly, the hard part was getting her here today without a scene. Once the house sells, we'll actually be able to breathe. She's had a good long run in it. I stood very still in the dark among the coats. Somewhere on the other side of that thin wall was the string quartet I had chosen, playing the very piece I had picked out, a slow, sweet thing Walter used to hum while he shaved. It kept playing while my daughter-in-law described selling my home over a glass of champagne. A good long run in it, as though my home were a horse being put out to pasture. As though the 44 years of my marriage, the room where my son took his first steps, the kitchen where Walter and I ate 10,000 quiet suppers, were a lot. A teardown, worth a fortune. They had already spoken to a realtor. They had already decided. I had paid for the flowers, the quartet, and the cake, and while I stood in the entry being told to wait outside, they were behind the wall dividing up my house like it was already theirs. I did not gasp. I did not weep. I pinned my hands together to keep them from shaking, and I made myself breathe. And I found underneath the hurt rising up cool and clean, the thing that would carry me through everything that came after. I stopped being hurt, standing in that coat room, and I started being clear. But that overheard sentence was only half of what I would learn. The other half was already waiting for me. In a folder, in a lawyer's office, 3 miles from my house, put there by a careful man who had been gone for 3 years, and who, it turned out, had been worried about this exact family for far longer than I ever knew. I called Raymond Ellison on the Monday after the wedding. Raymond had been Walter's attorney for 30 years, a small, plain office over the hardware store, the same brown carpet since the Reagan administration, a man who wore cardigans and remembered your children's names. When Walter died, Raymond had handled the simple things, the death certificate, the transfer of the accounts. But he had told me then, gently, that there was more, and that it would keep until I was ready. I had not been ready. Grief makes you slow. I let it keep. Now I was ready. Raymond sat me down, poured me a cup of the terrible coffee he was famous for, and took a folder out of a locked drawer. On the tab, in Walter's own square handwriting, it said only, "For Eleanor, when she needs it." "Your husband came to me in the fall of 2019, Raymond said. 2 years before he passed. He wasn't sick then, you'll remember. He was strong as an ox that whole year. This wasn't a dying man's panic. This was a bookkeeper doing what bookkeepers do." "Which is what?" I asked. Noticing a pattern, Raymond said, and quietly writing it down. He told me that Walter had never predicted any of this. He hadn't named Vanessa as a villain, or foreseen a wedding, or a realtor. He was simply a man who had spent 40 years watching how money moved through families, and he had grown troubled. Raymond used that word, troubled by the way our son had started letting other people handle the numbers. Walter kept coming back to it, Raymond said. Every visit, he'd circle back to the same worry, that after he was gone, Eleanor would keep giving, and no one would keep the record. And one day, the giving would be mistaken for owing. So he had not left me a prophecy. He had left me a structure, a recommendation, written in plain language, and the legal groundwork already laid, and a note in his hand that said the final decisions were mine. All of them. He would not make them for me from the grave. He had only made sure that when I was ready, the door would open. He trusted you to decide. Eleanor, Raymond said. His words. She'll know what to do. She always does. I just want the ground under her feet to hold. I read the recommendation line by line. And then, one by one, I signed. The first thing I did was protect the house. Raymond confirmed what Walter had set in motion years before. The deed was in my name alone, clean. No co-owners, no liens, no recorded claims, no legal interest held by David or Vanessa or anyone else. Whatever they had told a realtor, they had told a stranger about a house they did not own. But confirming it wasn't enough for me. I wanted it on the record where anyone who went looking would see it. So Raymond had me sign a homestead declaration and a formal notice to be filed with the county that very week. My name, my sole ownership, my protection, stamped into the public record for good. If anyone pulled the title on my house, the first thing they'd find was me. I signed the confirmation and the filing both. The record is not the same as the assumption Walter had written in the margin. I understood him now. The second thing I did was restructure the trust. Walter's recommendation was simple and fair, and I made it mine. On my death, the house and the bulk of our savings would skip David entirely and pass to my 2 grandchildren, Stephanie, the bride, and her younger brother Daniel in equal shares, held in trust until each of them turned 25, not one favoured over the other. Equal. Daniel, the steadier of the 2, the one who still called just to talk, I named as the future trustee, the overseer not because he would get more, but because he would guard it well. I signed the trust. The third thing was authority, and this was the one that stopped me. David had, in the soft years after his father died, been added to a bank account for emergencies, and named on paperwork he had encouraged me to sign without reading. Raymond laid the revocation in front of me and set down his pen, and for the first time all afternoon my hand did not move. Because signing it meant something I hadn't let myself feel yet. It meant admitting, in ink, that I could no longer trust my own son to act in my interest, not a stranger. My boy. The one whose fevers I sat up with, whose first word was up because he always wanted holding. My pen hovered over the line, and I felt the full weight of a mother taking authority back from her own child. There is no clean way to do that. No version where your heart doesn't fold in half. Raymond did not rush me. He is a patient man. He only said quietly, "Take the time you need, Eleanor. It's still your decision, right up until the ink dries." I took a breath, and I signed. The power of attorney, the account access, the standing he had quietly accumulated over me, gone, in my own hand, and it cost me more than all the rest of it put together. A revoked signature is a small, quiet thing. It does not feel small when the name you're revoking is one you gave. The fourth thing was the money itself. Raymond sent me to a banker named George at the branch on 3rd Street, a soft-spoken man who had known Walter for years. I sat across his desk and told him plainly what I wanted. David removed as a signer and beneficiary on every account that carried his name, and new accounts in my name only, with the grandchildren named where they belonged. George did not ask why. He had been in banking long enough to know that when a woman my age arrives with a folder and a straight back, she has done her grieving elsewhere and is not there to be talked out of anything. He printed the forms. I read every line, a habit that came late and cost me dearly, and I signed. There is a thing they don't tell you about being underestimated for years. When you finally sit down and read the papers yourself, you find the numbers were never complicated. They were only kept from you. Raymond notarized each page himself. His notary, A calm woman named Ruth pressed her seal into the paper with a small, firm click, and every click sounded to me like a lock turning, which reminded me, on the way home, I stopped and called a locksmith, Frank, from the shop on Miller Street, and asked him to meet me at the house the next morning to change every lock. He did it in under an hour and handed me the only 3 keys and said, "Nobody gets in that you don't let in, ma'am." I paid him, and I thanked him, and I stood in my own front hall holding my own keys. If you have ever signed your name to something and felt the whole room go quiet inside you, quiet the way a house is, quiet, after a storm finally passes, then you already know what happened. Next. There was one more thing in Walter's folder, a letter, sealed, my name on the front. I did not open it in Raymond's office. I brought it home. I made myself a cup of tea in my own kitchen, in my own house with its new locks, and I sat in Walter's chair by the window, and I opened it there. Eleanor, it began, in the square hand I had loved for 44 years. If Raymond is giving you this, then I'm not around to say it out loud, and I'm sorry for that. There's no gentle way to write that sentence, so I'm just writing it plain, the way I write everything. I want to tell you why I set all this up, because I don't want you to think I saw some disaster coming. I didn't. I'm not a fortune teller. I'm a bookkeeper. But I've spent my life watching how money moves through families, and I've noticed something. When one person does all the giving and nobody writes it down, the giving stops being a gift and starts being expected. And then one day, it's not even expected anymore. It's just assumed, invisible. And the person who gave everything gets treated like she owes. I started worrying about that with David a few years back. Not that he's a bad man. He isn't. But he stopped keeping his own books, Elle. He lets other people tell him what the numbers mean. And I know you. You will give, and you will tell yourself it's nothing, and you will never once keep the record. So I kept it for you. That's all this is. A record. The ground under your feet. I'm not telling you what to do with any of it. You're the smartest person I ever met, and you don't need a dead man deciding your life. Whatever you decide it yourself. Sign it yourself. And don't let anyone, not even me, tell you your name doesn't belong on the paper. The house is yours. It was always yours. You made it a home. Don't let anybody talk you out of your own front door. I loved every ordinary day. Walter. I read it twice. Then I sat a long while with the tea going cold and the light moving across the floor. I did not cry the way I cried at his funeral, from a place of being broken. I cried the way you cry when someone finally says the true thing out loud, and you realize you had been waiting years to hear it. It was not weakness. It was the opposite. Every tear felt like it was washing the fog off a window. He had not saved me. He had done something better. He had trusted me to save myself, and he had made sure I had the tools to do it. That is the difference between a man who wants to be a hero and a man who wants his wife to stand on her own 2 feet after he's gone. Walter never wanted to be my hero. He only ever wanted the ground under me to hold. I looked around the kitchen, the chipped blue bowl on the counter, the calendar still turned to the month he died, because I had never had the heart to flip it, the afternoon light coming in the way it had for 44 years. Everything in that house had a memory folded inside it, and they had wanted to sell it as a teardown. A lot. A fortune. I dried my eyes. I found a small blank notebook in the drawer of his desk, one of his unused, and I opened it to the first page. And I began, that evening, to keep my own record at last. They found out about the locks first. That is usually how it goes. David called on a Thursday. I could hear Vanessa in the background, feeding him lines, and I could hear the exact moment his key had not worked in my door. "Mom, my key isn't working. Did something happen with the locks?" "I changed them," I said. A pause. "Why would you do that?" Because they're my locks, I said. And my house. I heard Vanessa take the phone. Her voice came on, warm as ever, the concern laid on thick. Eleanor, we're just worried about you out there all alone. What if you fell? What if there was an emergency and we couldn't get to you? We only ever wanted what's best for you. And here I will be fair to her, because a person is not a cartoon. Some part of Vanessa may have believed that. People can worry about your falling down the stairs and covet your house at the very same time, and never notice the two feelings holding hands. That is what makes it so hard to see coming. Cruelty wears the coat of concern, and the coat is real wool. I know you worry about me falling, I said. I heard you at the wedding, too, behind the bar, talking to your sister about getting me settled somewhere, and the realtor, and how much the lot is worth. The silence on the line was total. Even Vanessa had no line for that. You wanted what's best for me, I repeated, and I let the words sit a moment. Vanessa, I have raised a child. I know the difference between wanting what's best for someone and wanting them out of the way. The first one asks what I want. The second one calls a realtor. And here, for the first time, something in her cracked. When she spoke again, the polish had gone out of her voice, and what was underneath it surprised me. You don't know what it's like, she said, quiet, almost to herself, standing next to my parents. The Prescotts, with the club and the boat, and their name on the hospital wing. Every holiday I watch David shrink, and I shrink right beside him. I just wanted one day where we looked like we belonged. One day where nobody had to know who paid for what. It was not an apology, but it was the first honest thing I had heard from her in years, and it landed somewhere real. A woman that frightened of looking small will spend her whole life making other people smaller and never once feel 1 inch taller for it. I felt something close to pity move through me. But pity is not permission. I'm not going to raise my voice, I said. I've never seen the use in it. I'm just going to tell you where things stand, and then I'm going to hang up and finish my tea. The record shows who gave and who took, and I have decided to stop lying to myself about which one I've been. The house is mine, on the deed, in my name alone, and now on file with the county besides. There are no co-owners and no claims. Whatever you told your realtor, you told him about something that was never yours to sell, and when he goes to check, that's exactly what he'll find. I let that land before I went on, because the next part was the one that mattered. I've changed my will and my trust, too. When I'm gone, everything goes to Stephanie and Daniel, equally, held for them until they're grown, with Daniel to look after it. It skips you. Not out of spite, Vanessa, out of arithmetic. You cannot inherit a house you already treated as sold. I heard David's voice break in then, small under his wife's. Mom! And here I stopped talking to her and spoke only to my son. You told me to wait outside, I said to him. At your own daughter's wedding, flowers and cake and music all bought with my money, you looked at me and told me to wait outside so a photographer could have a cleaner picture. I have thought about that a great deal, and what I've decided is this. Some apologies need to be held a while before they can be answered. I'm not ready to hear yours. That's not cruelty, that's just the truth about where we are. He was quiet. For the first time in years, he did not let Vanessa answer for him. You know where I live, I said. The number's the same. I'm not going anywhere. But you'll knock from now on, like a guest. And I hung up the phone, gently. It was not a slam. It was a door, closing on its own quiet hinge. It was Stephanie who came first, and she came alone. She showed up on a Saturday, 3 weeks after the honeymoon, with no husband and no mother, and no agenda I could find. She stood on my porch looking younger than her 24 years and said, "Grandma, can I come in? I don't want anything. I just need to sit in your kitchen for a while." I let her in. I still had the makings of the lunch. Walter always made the grandchildren plain grilled cheese, cut on the diagonal, the way her grandfather did it, with the little bowl of tomato soup he insisted on. I made her one without asking. Some hospitality doesn't need a menu. She ate half of it before she could talk. Then she said, I didn't know, Grandma. I swear I didn't know you paid for everything. Mom told me the flowers and the cake were from the Prescott side, and I didn't know they made you wait outside. I was looking for you during the pictures. I asked where you were, and Dad said you weren't feeling well and had gone home to rest. I let that sit between us. He had told her I'd gone home. He couldn't even give her the true version of his own unkindness. I found out after, she said, and her chin trembled. One of the servers told me, and I've felt sick ever since. You paid for my whole wedding, and they hid you in the coat room. Grandpa would have... She stopped. Grandpa would have hated it. Your grandfather, I said, would have said nothing at the wedding, and then quietly done exactly what I've done. I smiled a little. We were more alike than people knew. She laughed, wet-eyed. Do you remember when he taught me to keep a checkbook? I was, 9? He made me a little pretend ledger, and I had to write down every allowance and every candy bar. I thought it was the most boring game in the world. He did that with everyone he loved, I said. It was how he showed it. He wanted the people he loved to always know exactly what was theirs, so nobody could ever tell them different. Stephanie went quiet then, and I could see her understanding something about the last few weeks that she hadn't understood before, that the boring ledger game and the changed locks were the same act of love, wearing different clothes. She looked at me for a long moment. Daniel felt it too, you know. He said the whole day was off. He's been quieter than usual ever since. Since when, indeed? I did not say anything, but I marked it which grandchild had felt it too. I did not tell Stephanie about the trust that afternoon. It wasn't the moment, and it wasn't why she'd come. She hadn't come to be a beneficiary. She'd come because she was ashamed of her parents, and she loved her grandmother, and she wanted a grilled cheese cut on the diagonal in the one kitchen where she still felt like the person she used to be. That was enough. That was everything. Before she left, she washed her own plate at my sink, which her mother had never once done, and she hugged me at the door for a long time. I'm going to visit, she said. Really visit, not because anyone tells me to. I'd like that, I said, and I meant it all the way down. The months after were quiet, and quiet was what I wanted. The house did not sell, and it was the record that stopped it, not luck, and not their carelessness. When Vanessa's realtor pulled the title before listing, there it was, filed with the county the week after the wedding. The deed in my name alone, my homestead declaration, my formal notice, all of it stamped and public. He called David, I heard later, and asked the one question that ended the whole thing: who exactly is selling this house? There was no answer they could give. I had ended it with a signature weeks before they ever knew it was over. David and Vanessa's marriage went somewhere private and strained that I chose not to follow. That was theirs to sort out, not mine. It was Daniel who surprised me. My grandson, 22, quiet, the kind of young man who notices more than he says, started coming by on Sunday evenings. Not to check on me the way his father framed it, as though I were a stove someone had left on. He came to sit. The first Sunday, he showed up with a bag of the hard candies his grandfather used to keep in the truck, the butterscotch ones in the gold wrappers, and he set them on the table between us, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Figured you might miss these, he said. We didn't talk about the wedding, or the locks, or any of it, not for a long while. He fixed the wobbly leg on the kitchen chair without being asked. He noticed the porch light had been flickering and brought a bulb the next week. And, one evening, while he was drying the dishes I washed, he said, not looking at me, "Since when does Grandma sit in the back?" That's what I kept thinking at the wedding. It didn't sit right. No, I said. It didn't sit right with me either. That was all. But watching him fix things quietly the way Walter used to, I understood exactly why I had named him to look after the trust someday. Not because he was owed it, because he was the kind of person who tightens a loose chair leg without being asked, and who notices when someone he loves has been moved to the back of the room. You want a person like that watching over what matters after you're gone. But here is the one small thing about David I will tell you, because it's the thing I hold on to. David called me on a Sunday in the fall, not to argue, not with Vanessa in the background, just to talk. He was clumsy at it. He'd forgotten how. And near the end of the call, he mentioned that he'd driven past on Sunday and seen my porch light on. And he said, without seeming to notice he'd said it, "I'm glad the light was on at Mom's house." Mom's house, not the house, not the property, not the lot. Mom's house. It was a small thing. One word, really. I am not naive enough to call it a full turning. A man does not undo years in a single Sunday, and I have not decided yet whether his apology, when it fully comes, will be one I can answer. That door is still ajar, not open. But he called it Mom's house, and he knew he could not come in without knocking, and Stephanie visits every other week, and Daniel calls just to talk. I am not alone. Let me be very clear about that, because I know it's the fear that sits under all the others. I did not end up alone. I have Raymond's terrible coffee, and Frank's spare key, and Ruth's little notary seal, and Carol next door, and 2 grandchildren who chose me. I am alone in my house the way a captain is, alone on a ship she is glad to be steering. That is a different thing entirely. Tonight, I am sitting in Walter's chair by the window, with my tea and my little notebook and the porch light on. Someone asked me, not long ago, how I could stay so calm through all of it, the wedding, the coat room, the locks, the phone calls, as if calm were a kind of surrender. But calm was never surrender. Calm was the weapon. A raised voice would have given them a scene to talk about, a way to make me the problem. Silence and a signature gave them nothing to hold. I did not shout my son out of my will. I simply signed my name where it belonged, in my own hand, and let the paper do what paper does. They told me to wait outside. So I did. And while I waited, I read every line of what my husband left me, and I signed my way back to my own front door. Sometimes dignity does not arrive with shouting. I picked up the notebook and wrote tonight's line in my own hand. They sat me at the back of my own family and told me to wait. I waited just long enough to remember the door was always mine, and now I am the one who decides who walks through it. On the windowsill above Walter's chair, the roses have dried. Now the white ones from the corsage I pinned on myself in a dark window, while my son waited for me to disappear. I never threw them out. Of all the flowers I paid for that expensive day, they are the only ones that were ever really mine, because I was the one who chose them, and I was the one who kept them. The house is safe. The children will have it, fairly, when it's time. Walter was right about all of it, and the beautiful thing is he never once had to say so out loud. He just made sure the ground under me would hold, and then he trusted me to stand on it. I finished my tea. I turned off the lamp, and I went up my own stairs, in my own house, without falling, and slept the whole night through.